We'll start in a couple of minutes.
Sorry about the last minute panic. I was coming off another call.
Always the way.
Oh, yes.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. We're here today to discuss the challenges and updates and future trends of the PCI-DSS version 4, together with Hub Security's very own Gabriel Patlis, VP Global Head of GRC, as well as a number of industry experts, including Adam Kaysen, Daniel Farr, Matthew Gorge, Jeremy King, and Sebastian Mazas. Thank you all for being here today. We'll start our webinar with a brief introduction from you, Gabriel Patlis, and then our panelists will each get the chance to briefly introduce themselves. Afterwards, we'll get into a bit of a deeper discussion on everything related to the security of the future global payment system. And as usual, we'll leave about 30 minutes at the end of our discussion for a short Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout the discussion, feel free to drop them in the Q&A section below, and we will get to them later on. Now we have an impressive lineup of panelists, and I'm excited to have them introduce themselves. But first, a few words from Gabriel Patlis.
Thank you. Gabi, it's also okay. Thank you. Okay, so my name is Gabi Patlis, Gabriel. I'm the head of GRC in Hub Security. I'm working in Hub Security, or actually it's ComSex that was acquired by Hub Security a year ago for 6 years. I'm a QSA myself and also a lead auditor for ISO certifications. That is about myself. And today we are going to discuss about the shifting from version 3.2.1 of the PCI-DSS to version 4. Thank you, Jeremy, for approving. I find it very, very exciting because there are a lot of changes in the new version of this standard. Many things happened since the last version, the 3.2.1, that was published, I think, 4 years ago. And usually the PCI is publishing a new version every 3 years, but amid the coronavirus, many things happens actually. One of them, a lot of threats were occurred during the pandemic because people were working remotely. And also the PCI has to change the way that the assessment has to be performed. So for instance, the on-site assessment has been shifted, and now it is possible to do the assessment remotely. So in general, that's what we are going to speak about today. Thank you, Maura.
Thank you, Gabi. We're glad you could be here with us today. Now I'd like to take a few minutes to do a quick introduction, starting with you, Adam. Can you share with our listeners a bit about yourself and your field of expertise?
Absolutely. And first off, I wanted to thank the whole Hub Security team for organizing this. I think we've got a fun panel here, and this is going to be an exciting discussion. But a little bit of background about myself to start. My name is Adam Kaysen. I'm FutureX's Vice President for Global and Strategic Alliances. A little bit of background about FutureX. We're a manufacturer of hardware security modules, or HSMs, for payments, for general purpose. We also do key management. So we're very firmly entrenched in the PCI space. And so I've been with FutureX about 15 or so years now, and I'm based out of our Texas headquarters.
Great, thank you, Adam. Jeremy, hi.
Hello there. Yes, thank you again for organizing this excellent webinar. So my name is Jeremy King. I'm the Vice President for Europe, Middle East and Africa for the PCI Security Standards Council. I've worked for the Council now for the last 12.5 years, and it's been a really exciting journey from the early days of really just trying to get organizations to stop storing data, to seeing how technology and the ways in which organizations share information and the different payment methods that are coming along, to see really how payment security has changed in those years, but also unfortunately how the criminals continue to attack us in ever different ways. And as a result of that, as Gabriel said, we have had to update our standard to reflect both the changes in technology, but also the changes in how the criminals are attacking us. And hopefully with DSS4, we are really helping to improve payment security. But obviously that's going to need the support of everybody, both on this panel, but also those who are listening in as well. And I hope together we can do that. So thank you very much for arranging this, and thank you very much for those who are attending.
Thank you, Jeremy. Matthew, you're next.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. My name is Matthew Gorge. I'm the founder and CEO of VG Trust, which is a provider of GRC SaaS solutions for PCI, GDPR, and many other security frameworks. I've been in cybersecurity for about more than 20 years now, and I've had the privilege to work with some of the other panelists here. So hi, everyone. Nice to see you again, and nice to meet the other ones. My claim to fame is that I wrote a book called The Cyber Elephant in the Boardroom, which is essentially a book about how we decipher cybersecurity for the board, and we try and address cyber accountability as a business risk. As we know from PCI, accountability is key, and there's various stakeholders that need to be involved throughout the process on an ongoing basis. And so it's important that we're able to talk to all of them in a language that they can comprehend, and that allows them to make the right decisions for compliance.
Thank you, Matthew. Now to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Moran. Yes, I'm Daniel Farr, Dan Farr. I head up the PCI-DSS practice globally for Forgenix. So Forgenix are a QSA company. We provide consultancy and advisory services across all of the PCI standards. We're also a accredited PFI company providing instant response services as well. So here to give two sides to the story, from the compliance and the instant response, certainly talking about the emerging threats and linking some of the changes in version 4 to what we've been witnessing, some of which for the last 3-4 years since 3.2.1 was around, certainly around e-com. So yeah, thank you very much for having me, and looking forward to the conversations.
Thank you. Now, last but not least, Sebastian.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. So Sebastian Mazas is the name. I'm an associate director at Verizon, like Forgenix, one of the largest QSA companies in the world, a long partner of the PCI Council. Hi, Jeremy again. I'm currently the global head of payment security, so in charge of everything related to the delivery methodology and quality management for all our PCI services. I'm a QSA since 2008, and I also had the chance to be in charge of PCI services in many regions, EMEA and APAC. So I've got a pretty good knowledge what it means to be PCI compliant in those regions. I'm also participating to our annual report about payment security, and pretty excited to share my experience and Verizon experience in that domain with you guys today.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to divide today's event into 3 topics: market and technology overview, challenges and risks, and solutions and approaches. We'll begin with our first topic, market and technology overview. First question is to you, Sebastian. How does PCI-DSS protect payment cards?
So that's indeed a very good question. To answer, let me go back to some initial numbers. We produce every year a report that's called the Data Breach Investigation Reports. And in the latest report, we see that there are still some major industries that are struggling with the payment card data. 24% of the compromised data in the retail industry are payment card data. When it comes to the hospitality, we are talking about 41%. So it's definitely protecting this information is critical in some domains. So PCI-DSS is just a baseline for security, and it's continuously evolving thanks to the work that the PCI Council is doing to take into account the new threats and changes in technologies, and we know we are going to talk about some of it today. It's a holistic coverage for the payment system environment, and it covers from the network to the governance of, and it's considered the minimum necessary set of controls to protect that information. And this is really the core thing. So does that work? Well, also one thing that we have seen over the years, in 2008, with our first reports, we could see that the payment card data was really the top compromised data in the world. Today is the less true. We see more credentials and personal information that are breached. And we are pretty sure that the application of standards, especially PCIs, has helped to move the needle to a very to much less payment card data to be stolen. So I do believe that's one of the reasons we say PCI can help.
Jeremy, why are the major changes introduced with version 4?
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, so obviously, as Gabriel said, we haven't done a major update to the DSS since 2018. And in fact, version 3 actually came out in something like 2013. So this has been a standard update that's been quite some time in the making. And one of the big changes, one of the major changes was really that PCI-DSS was always very, very defined. It basically said exactly what we were expecting, what the requirement was, what you were expected to do to show conformance or compliance to that requirement, and that was it. We were very, very defined approach. Going forward with the cloud, with new technology, with data pinging left, right, and center, with going from a 4-party model to a multi-party model, to going from 3rd parties to 4th parties to 5th parties, with more and more organizations involved or having a link to the potential data, it really became necessary to have in some more flexibility. And we've had to introduce that, and we've introduced that through what we've called our customized approach. And the customized approach will allow organizations where, if they look at the definitive wording of a requirement, go, actually, that's not how our organization operates, we can't meet that. But we do have some excellent security measures in place, is to use a customized approach to be able to work with their QSA. And I've strongly re-emphasized that, to work with your QSA, to show that whilst we can't meet that wording as it's written, our customized approach, we take security so seriously that the protection measures we have equal to that. They're at the same level or higher. And so this will allow some flexibility that we've never had. It's going to need more risk analysis, more risk assessment. It's going to need really better definition of your policies and how you're using the techniques to protect it, and critically, collaboration and cooperation with your QSA. This isn't something you can do halfway through your assessment, by the way. It is something that right from the start, you've got to go, no, this is how we're going to approach it. And you start that sort of conversation with the QSAs early, because there is a lot of work to do. Hopefully in the first year, once you've done that, then it will become easier going forward, but it's a major change. The other big change is that through the process, we actually introduced what we call our request for comment. And through the development of the standard, we had 6,000 comments. And of those 6,000 comments we received, 60% plus actually led to a change. So when you look at the version 4, when you look at how it's written and laid out, most of that has changed because of people sending in comments So generally saying, can you have more clarity of the guidance? Can you make it clear what it is we're expected to do? And that is now really very clear in the requirements. And so it's much easier for people to read it and go, this is what we're expected to do. This is what we've got to do. Now, obviously, we've updated some of the requirements. We've introduced 64 new requirements. There is a summary of changes document available on the website. Please go and read that. But just a couple of my favorites. We've introduced 12.5.2, which basically says you've got to undertake a PCI-DSS scope validation every 12 months. A lot of the QSAs always called that requirement 0. It's got a requirement. It's in there, which is something they've long pushed for. Multi-factor authentication is now critical. We need to make sure people are, who they say they are, wherever they're operating in that environment. That we've updated the password policy. We know passwords are being replaced by a lot of people, but still they exist, and we've tried to update that. And so we've made a lot of changes, hopefully to improve payment security. Again, if you've still got the defined approach, if you still like that, that's still there. If it's difficult, we've got the customized approach. So quite a lot of reading, quite a lot of reading, as these guys know. They've been burning through that for the last 3 or 4 months, if not longer, but some good changes to help improve payment security.
Yeah, I would like to add, Jeremy, when customers are asking me what's the changes or the difference, I say the previous version was 149 pages and the new version is 360 pages. So that's it.
Lots of reading, lots of guidance, hopefully, in those 360 pages.
Exactly.
So, what are the timelines for implementing version 4?
No, yeah, it's a really good. Sorry, please go ahead, Gabriel.
Okay. So actually, the previous version 3.2.1 is still legit, and we can use it, or the merchant and service provider can decide that they can be compliant until March 2024, and by actually April 2024, only the version 4 will be legit. So actually, at the moment, there are, I think, 2 years or 18 months of overlaps between both of assessment. What we are doing with our customers, we decided that we start to assessing, or at least giving a gap analysis for version 4, but still sometimes it depends on the customer, our customers, if they are ready for moving to the new version, or still this year keep the 3.2.1.
Matthew, are there any existing or upcoming technologies that can make compliance easier?
Yeah, that's a great question. We obviously, once you've done your scoping exercise, which really should be the starting point, and you've mapped out your ecosystem and where you may have credit card holder data, the objective of the game, so to speak, is to reduce the scope as much as you can. Now, there are some technologies that allow you to do that. For instance, point-to-point encryption. And as Jeremy was saying, it's great to work with QSAs because they can help you reduce your scope. I don't really like the word descoping, because I don't think you can descope. You can reduce your scope. The only way to descope is to stop taking credit card payments. But you can use technology to reduce the scope, to tokenize, to render the information unreadable to potential hackers and so on. So point-to-point encryption is definitely one of the technologies that's out there. Tokenization, whether it's in the cloud or not. But also, you should also look at technology to help you improve the process of becoming and remaining compliant with PCI. So obviously, integrated risk management solutions, governance solutions, but also a requirement that a lot of folks seem to not associate with technology would be anything that has to do with training, right? So requirement 12.6, for instance, unless it's changed in the latest version, but I don't think it has. Maybe the QSAs or Jeremy can correct me on that. But the one that says that everybody that has access to credit card holder data needs to be trained upon hire and once annually, you can do that through e-learning. You know, you can do that through automated training. You can do certification. You can do a lot of different things. And so when you take the pure technology stack and then you look at governance, risk compliance, and e-learning, there's a lot of the work that you do with PCI that can be automated. The other thing is, I always say that security is a journey and not a destination. So with PCI, every year you get the opportunity to demonstrate that you're in compliance. And I say the opportunity, even though it's a requirement, it is an opportunity for you to demonstrate to your clients, to the regulators, to enforcement bodies, that you're taking security at heart. So when you do this, wouldn't it be better if you could use a solution that will prompt you to look at all the changes and all the controls that are repeated throughout the year? So you have daily, weekly, quarterly, monthly, and yearly requirements within PCI. So you can also automate that process. So I think technology is really here to make the journey easier and to simplify it.
Now, a bit from a broader perspective, Adam, when it comes to moving payments to the cloud, what are some of the biggest trends you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And, you know, it's interesting looking at the role of the cloud and how the hyperscalers in particular have really transformed a lot of how information is processed and how things are done in the modern day. And one of the things that I've seen over the last really about 2 to 4 years in particular is a much faster push to start moving payment workloads out into the various public cloud providers. I think AWS, Azure, Google, others out there. And so this is clearly a market interest. I think for a lot of the standard reasons why companies would look at the cloud for general enterprise workloads, these also apply to payments. But there are some unique considerations there that I think are interesting. And I did like what was said earlier about involving QSAs in organizations' payment journey and compliance journey as early on as possible, because that really is something where, especially when you're looking at new things. So for example, moving payment workloads out into a cloud provider, being able to really understand how that all fits together with your PCI side of things, with your overall business goals, and make sure you're tracking in that same direction is important. But one in particular that I think organizations are realizing, one particular benefit that is that in using service providers for some of these, whether it's for the payment application hosting side or on the hardware security module side for the cryptography and key management angle, particularly for PCI PIN compliance, involving third-party suppliers for that or service providers is often a de-risking activity in a lot of ways. The idea being that rather than maybe for some of the small to mid-sized organizations where they have personnel who are working on many different things at many times, you outsource some of that to providers who live and breathe that 24/7. So, one of the interesting things as well that you sometimes see with these types of dynamic changes in the industry is when standards don't keep pace or when they're misaligned with the technology. And I think with PCI, we've seen something very different, where the PCI standards are doing a pretty impressive job of keeping pace with some of the trends out there related to moving to the cloud, to pushing payment security, to external service providers. And it's been interesting to see how that's continued to progress. And it's nice to see that there aren't really any roadblocks, at least from what we've seen so far.
What are the new technologies we expect to see in the future of payments, Daniel?
So I guess from a payments perspective, the cloud's been mentioned a fair bit. Payments is one of those industries where the SLAs for uptime are massively important. So you don't often see the skip to bleeding edge technology straight away. It's more of a progress once, you know, people gain understanding, assurance, and understand the risks of moving to those platforms. I think where we talk about the standards developing, obviously in version 4, the requirement language changes a lot to allow for cloud technologies and those sorts of things. But then I work quite significantly on the special interest group paper for container orchestration tools and container platforms during the last year. And we spoke about that at the community meeting. So aside from just what is in the DSS, there's a lot of guidance for new platforms, new technologies that come that supplement that will then help you understand how those technologies and platforms align with the main standards that you see. So I see that as being an area, you know, that the move to the cloud and then the adoption of containers and container orchestration, you know, to reduce the manual burden workload. The more manually configured systems are, the harder it is to solve instance, you know, to maintain consistency, and consistency is assurance, which de-risks, which, you know, allows you to demonstrate controls are implemented consistently as well.
We have a question from our audience. How much would PCI PIN change along with PCI-DSS? Jeremy.
Thank you for that one. So all of our standards we review constantly. So the actual PCI PIN is a separate requirement. It's a separate standard. It covers different parts of the process. It probably covers different entities as well. And we will review that. I think Gabriel said earlier on, we generally update our standards on a sort of 3-year life cycle. It's moved a little bit more towards sort of as and when we need them. So as we're rolling out the changes to DSS4, we're obviously looking at the impact of that on other standards, and we'll certainly be doing that. I can't remember off the top of my head when PCI PIN's next up due for an update. I'll go and check now. Now I've seen the question come in, but obviously there is a lot of other supporting documents on our website that are changing. I think something like 150 documents have been updated so far. So when a DSS major change come through, it does ripple through all of our standards, and we do review all of our standards to see what impact some of the changes have. And if there are changes that need to be made to any of the other standards, then yeah, we'll absolutely update them. I don't know if Dan or any of the others or Sebastian have any other input on that.
Yeah, I would like. Yeah,
oh, Gabby.
Sorry, I would like to add for the previous complete what Daniel said. If we remember, we had the PCI-DSS that was expired actually on October. And the DSS, the current version, has combined the replacing for the PCI-DSS that it's the SSF. It means that nowadays the PCI-DSS requires to leverage or to be more updated with the more application security in the assessment itself. I mean, it's not separated as it used to be previously, that we had a payment application separately from the DSS. Now it's combined because most of the environments, including application services, hybrid in. Right, Jeremy? Can you?
No, absolutely. Yes, definitely.
So
Yeah.
PCI PIN was updated in March 2021. So
thank you.
We're early in that part. I know we've been discussing recently some of the changes internally for and what that means from an assessment perspective. So early in that life cycle, right?
Okay, we have another question from our audience. How to protect modern day cards as they provide cardless and wireless transactions. Daniel, I think we'll stay with you.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, well, I guess PCI-DSS covers card account data and for the branded cards. So Maybe some of the wireless side or account-to-account transfer isn't necessarily covered under that, but PCI-DSS is a guide of good security controls that can be applied in any environment. And Jeremy will pay me for that one later, I think. But you know, that, I guess, in terms of the modern day cards, obviously certain technologies that have come in, the mobile-based payment technologies, so Apple Pay, Google Pay, they tokenize cards at the point of entry, so it's not the card number that's used for every payment. It's a unique token per payment for each device. And I think, you know, I guess in the card processing land, you know, look at how the technologies evolve. Obviously, we're seeing point-to-point encryption has been around a while, but within retail implements systems for 5 to 10 years. You know, they're not changing payment systems every year. They write it down. It's an asset. It gets, and so we're seeing point-to-point encryption being the minimum requirement now for a lot of merchants and service providers. Those alternate payment methods link into those as well. So, you know, we see that a lot. I think when you look at the other work that the council do, which is outside of the DSS, the MPOC, the CPOC, which are for mobile-based payments, mobile payments, pin on glass, you know, to evolve the technologies that are used within the payments industry. So it's to be aware that the standards that are available are wider than just PCI-DSS, and there may be others that support the needs that you're looking at.
No, absolutely, Dan. And I think just to build on that, obviously we work very closely with our colleagues at EMVCO. EMVCO have spent a lot of time over the last few years working on tokenization. They have a product called Secure Remote Commerce, that was the word, sorry, Secure Remote Commerce, which is basically relying on a token. Now, from our perspective at PCI, we think that's fantastic because it's removing the PAN from that environment, therefore removing the opportunity for a criminal to be able to steal data that they can reutilize. In exactly the same way as Dan said there with the point-to-point encryption, we remove the PAN from the criminal to be able to do anything with. What does that need? Well, it starts relying on some of the equipment that Adam is manufacturing, the HSM, so that we can have secure encryption, secure decryption. We can validate the security of that equipment. We can validate that it's being used properly by those entities that are using it. So then, as Dan said, we've got the end-to-end security. We know that the data is of no use to the criminal if they can obtain it. The same as well with the tokens used in the Apple Pays, the Google Pays. We've moved that data that's of any use away from it, so it makes it a much more secure and a safer shopping environment. And from the council, we can look at and ensure the security of where those two bits of data come together. So the token service providers, we can ensure and assess and validate those to make sure that that data is being looked after and secured when it does come together. So again, it's utilizing the technology, it's working with these organizations and the vendors and the developers to be able to ensure that we can have this really sort of end-to-end security. And again, that is beginning to show progress. When you looked at the UK fraud figures, e-commerce fraud is finally beginning to fall, and that's something we're all very proud of, because a lot of people have been working hard, but there's still a lot more to do. We can't let up from that. And as Dan said, the criminals move to other things. Use the DSS. It is a good data security standard, so please use it.
Gabby, if issuers, payment gateways, and merchants are so different, how can they be measured by the same standard? Aren't standards somehow generic?
Okay, that's a good question. So generally, there are service providers and merchants. Of course, there are also issuers and acquirers. But the standard defines first, we have levels, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we have a service provider and a merchant. A service provider can be level 1 or 2, and all the merchants can be upon the amount of transactions they are processing per year. And it depends on the payment brand, which level they are. But generally speaking, we have a standard with all the requirements, and depends according to the business. Okay, there are a different kind of assessment. What does it mean? For instance, if the merchant does not in any way store the credit cards, so he might be using SAQA or SAQ-AEP. Okay, so first of all, the company, the entity, has to figure out for which level he has to stand, and then for which type of assessment he has to go. There is a guidance in the PCI library that each entity has to figure out. Usually the entity that decides is the acquirer or the payment brand, actually, because many times the customers are asking us which level do we have to go, or which assessment do we have to take. So we are asking them, go to your acquirer and ask him which type of assessment you need to go. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this is our second topic now. Moving on, challenges and risks. And Daniel, what are the challenges or risks being addressed by version 4? Daniel?
Sorry, subject to mute. I think there's definitely a broad set there. If we talk about a few specific examples over the last 2 years with the pandemic and the switch to online, the e-commerce space has grown massively. With that, the data breaches that go along with that. We've seen, as I've mentioned, that we do PFI services, so we do the forensic incident response in the event of a data breach. And for a number of years, not just the last 2 years, we've seen the manipulation of payment pages, the redirection of payment pages, you know, the scrapers, etc., being on e-commerce sites. And if we look in the version 4 changes, there are specific requirements now that pick up and address those risks and how that can impact smaller merchants, which, you know, whilst we mentioned, Gavi mentioned before around the use of self-assessment questionnaire A, which applies largely to e-commerce merchants that, you know, use a hosted payment page or an iframe. You know, if you look at that model previously, they had to do some level of configuration to their systems. They had to patch their systems, have a password policy, and monitor their third parties. All good things, you know, we're not saying they're not, but now we're adding in the monitor the payment page, collect logs, you know, make sure that any scripts that are run on the site are approved, and monitor that the payment page being used is the one that you intend. Because those are the things that we've seen evolve over the time, and we know there are controls that we can put in place to specifically mitigate that risk. I think when we look at, you know, the where we started with PCI-DSS in the face-to-face, the retail environment, like we say, that has come such a long way now in terms of using point-to-point encryption, not storing cardholder data wherever possible. And I guess the QSA in me, the happy part is that scope validation is now a requirement that entities have to do. And the biggest thing, you know, the biggest challenge in a PCI-DSS assessment is getting the scope right. And the biggest thing that impacts organizations is not identifying what is in scope or what is out of scope, because in the out of scope environment, whilst an organization may maintain controls, they're not necessarily the same level as within their PCI environment, and they're not monitored or subject to assessment. And so that getting the scope right, I think that will change a lot for organizations in terms of how they approach their PCI assessment, and having to demonstrate that as a requirement to the QSA, rather than it being on the QSA to validate the scope of their assessment, really is like a big change for organizations. Knowing what you have, knowing where you keep it, knowing why you keep it, they're all massive questions that can help reduce risk to account data as a whole within an organization.
Okay, we have a couple questions from our audience about mobile payment, fintech companies, and the challenges they're probably will encounter. And we also have a similar question about cloud applications. So I think, Adam, you'll be the one to answer that, because we are clearly
Absolutely.
seeing a movement in financial services to cloud ecosystems. So maybe just tell us a bit about the challenges and how can organizations overcome them?
Absolutely. And I think all of these questions really tie together around the overall trend of modernization. Companies, whether they're fintechs, whether they're neobanks, whether they're retailers, really anyone in the overall PCI ecosystem, we're seeing just a massive trend towards modernization, towards adopting new payment methods, whether it's soft POS or tap to pay or all the different flavors of mobile payments that are out there. Seeing how those are incorporated into ecosystems to provide new opportunities really for the end customer, or new ways to smooth out transaction flows. That is absolutely a big trend. Now, looking at some of the challenges that the fintechs see, I think one of the big ones, especially as it relates to the cloud or really what fintechs are doing in general, is deciding what they want to be experts in and what they don't, especially for newer organizations. And I realize not all fintechs are new or in startup mode or anything like that, but a large number of them are that we see. And some of the more successful ones are the ones who are able to, in addition to providing a great product, to look and look internally and say, yes, we are good at doing this. We need to focus energy on this. And no, maybe it would be better if we relied on some external expertise for that. As far as some of the questions about how specific scans can be run in a cloud environment. So for example, with database as a service, I might defer to Daniel on that one, or possibly Sebastian there. But I know, looking at the way these different cloud applications are deployed, again, going back to what Jeremy said earlier about looking from the beginning and not surprising anyone midway through your audits. Oh, you know what, we're doing it this way. That sort of entry level or beginning of the stage involvement is key.
So one of the discussions we've had at the Gear Group, and Jeremy and I have had this together, is around, in the DSS version 4 update, the push for transparency between service providers and the merchants or other service providers that use them. So when we're talking about cloud environments, and what to understand is they must provide you with their attestation of compliance for the services that they provide to you, and they must provide you with a responsibilities matrix that highlights who's responsible for what within the services that are provided. And so getting a clear understanding of that before you start your journey, that is absolutely key, and engaging a QSA to help you in that. The cloud obviously offers and provides a number of maybe shortcuts to compliance, but if you haven't consulted those documents, then you're probably going to come in for surprises further down the line. As for whether you need to run ASV scans, etc., it is a case-by-case basis depending on the services that you provide, because some of the services may be provided by your provider depending on the model that you deploy your solution within, but that may not replace the need for, say, code scans or application vulnerability assessments or application pen tests. So it's going to be, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer there, but certainly when it comes to service providers, that AOC responsibilities matrix, work with your QSA, will get you the best results as early as possible.
That's absolutely right, Dan. I think one thing to really reiterate is that even as a merchant who's working and outsourcing everything, they still have some responsibility. What they have to do is significantly less, but they still have some role to play. And really, the service providers need to make sure that the merchants they're working with understand that. I think coming back right the way back to your first part of that question as well, Moran, is that there are a lot of fintechs moving into the payment space. I think the technology, the opportunities that the last few years has created has brought a lot of new organizations in. And I would say for a lot of those organizations who have not had a history in payment security, coming into the payment space with new ideas, which are, all bells and whistles, which is fantastic. If they don't consider security at the start and then trying to manipulate or add security at the end is a really bad idea. The DSS4 is actually there to help them. And I think fintechs coming in, if they can start talking about security early on, it's not a nice thing to talk about. They always want to talk about getting things to market so quickly. But if you can get things to market quickly and that they're secure because you've thought about security from the start, it's going to save you a lot of time. It's going to save you a lot of money. It's going to make your products more secure and actually more exciting to the people you're trying to sell them to. So yeah, we love to see the fintechs coming in, but we need to work with them closer to make sure they're thinking about the security from the start and not at the end.
Jeremy, what about edge computing? How can I accept payments securely in a remote location?
No, absolutely. And I think we've touched on that a few times. So one of the biggest changes we've seen through the COVID years has been people moving away from cash, carrying less and less cash and moving towards cards, both contactless and chip-based cards. And certainly we saw this coming and we started working on this again pre-COVID, where we started looking at how can we enable remote merchants at events or fairs or markets, Christmas markets especially, to be able to accept card-based payments. And so we've released a series of standards to try and cover the various different options. We started with a standard we called SPOC. Sorry, the names for these are terrible. Software-based pin-on commercial off-the-shelf device, which is essentially saying, how can we enable a chip card to be used with a mobile phone? And we set the standard up to do that. You had a remote secure device that would also be able to cope with the pin blocks. We allowed the pin entry on the mobile phone. The two would talk together. And we shifted from a position of physical security of the point of interaction to one of constant reassurance through having a monitoring entity that would constantly check the phone to make sure that it hadn't been hijacked or compromised. And that way we had confidence, or the consumers can have confidence, that when they're using these devices at these events, they can do so in a secure manner. We moved that forward with our contactless payments on COTS, so people could literally tap on the mobile phone and go. And again, we could still have the confidence. And then just at the end of November, we released our latest version, which is MPOC, mobile payments on COTS, which brings together contactless and PIN. So really, we have now enabled remote merchants to be able to accept card-based payments in a secure manner. Honest, I've been around a few Christmas markets. They are fantastic fun. Every single merchant now had a form of PIN acceptance, of card acceptance on their stand, and they were being used constantly. It's no longer of, can I use my card? People automatically are reaching for their card, knowing that we've got the standards in place. The vendors have done a fantastic job producing secure products and solutions. And yes, customers can have the confidence in using them. And that is the industry working together with the council, with everybody to bring this forward. And that is a constant challenge for us, trying to make sure that different payment methods can continue to be developed to meet market needs in a secure way.
Sounds amazing. Sebastian and Matthew, how can a company comply with DSS4 without experiencing major challenges?
Well,
any tips?
Yeah, well, one of the first thing, and I want to come back to what was said just before. One of the challenges a company would have in order to be compliant would be understanding the scope of this, the compliance itself, especially with the service providers. And we talk a lot about cloud, etc. One of the challenges we see for a company is when they want a cloud-based solution or a service-based solution, they need to be careful of what has been the marketing communication around it. Many times the solution has been reviewed around PCI, maybe by a QSA, and will indicate what are the requirements the solution will help you to be compliant with. But when it comes to a service, what we talked about is the service globally from the service provider helping you on one or two or more requirements is actually compliant. And that distinction is really significant and can be a challenge for a company to be compliant. What we've seen also in when it comes to compliance, the major challenges that the companies are facing is maintaining that compliance. So again, believing you can comply to PCI without experiencing major challenges is actually not believing it's possible. I mean, to paraphrase one of our famous movies, I mean, security is not a long, quiet river. Everything can happen and in a flash, and you need to be prepared. You need to have really managed security on a BAU perspective. And when we look at the challenges that our companies have year over year in terms of compliance, we see that continuously testing their environments, having proper risk management, patch management, things that seems to be so natural. Every time there is something wrong from one year to the other. And that's purely natural. And we have a human tendency to have corrective actions, not reactive measures. And so having a strong strategy, not only to define and implement security, but to maintain it year over year, that's one of the biggest challenges that the companies need to overcome.
So if I can,
Yes.
yeah, if I could bounce back on that, I think that one of the other main issues with driving the compliance efforts is to get a sponsor, an ally at board level. And I'm not just talking about somebody who's going to sign the checks and give you a budget, but somebody that's going to be driving the compliance efforts and going to be a champion in the boardroom. And unfortunately, what tends to happen in the boardroom is that the board goes through what I call the 5 stages of cyber grief, which Jeremy and I'm sure Sebastian are very familiar with, where the first one is, denial. The board says, PCI, don't want to hear about it. That's not our problem. What we want to do is we want to drive efficiency. We want to create profits for the shareholders. We want to create employment and so on. So leave us alone with PCI. Then comes the anger. And the anger is, you again, why are you talking to me about compliance? I gave you money to hire a CISO. I gave you money to buy firewalls, to do training and so on. Go and talk to the security guys, we'll sort you out. Then comes the next stage, which is really all about bargaining. And the bargaining stage is saying, well, we'll do a little bit of it because we see that our competitors have been hacked, or we see that the regulator is doing something, or we've seen that fines have been imposed by whoever. We've seen that an acquiring bank is now revoking the right of one of our competitors to do business. We don't want that. So what we'll do is we'll hire a big firm to do an assessment, and that's us off the hook. And of course, it's a good start, but it's not you off the hook. Then comes the depression, or we have been hacked. The regulator is in the lobby of our building, demanding to talk to the chairperson, and demanding to talk to whoever is in charge of compliance. And then eventually comes the acceptance. And the acceptance is that it's not rocket science. In fact, I've been saying for years that whether you take credit card payments or not, you should use PCI as the minimum standard de facto controls to drive your compliance efforts. Think about it. PCI is very well written. It's written by people that need to implement it, and it's as Jeremy was saying, it's reviewed. There's comments from the community, from the assessors, from the merchants, from the banks, and so on. So it's really, really well written. And so if you don't know where to start with compliance, you just take PCI and you replace credit card holder data with sensitive data, and there's your initial drive, right? Of course, you can go beyond it, and some of it won't apply. But the reality is that it's really not rocket science. And between confirming the scope, reducing the scope, putting the right technology in place, and making it a continuous journey, there's no reason really not to comply at this stage.
I would like to add that from my experience or our experience, we are guiding, or we are in the journey, as you are using the word, all around the year with the customers. It means that we are not meeting the customer only a month before the assessment. We have companies, we have entities that we are guiding. We just finished 1 year, they receive the AOC, and immediately we start the next year assessment. It means that it takes hundreds of hours, it takes months to be compliant, and always the environment change. And also, of course, the standard change, and also ourselves, we learn more and more about the PCI and interpretations, because it's really a huge a standard that it's very difficult to learn everything immediately. It takes years. I think, from my feeling, that I'm already 3 years a QSA, and frankly speaking, I don't think that I know everything. So all the time we learn new things. Really, that's what happened in our company.
And if I may add something to that, and Jeremy didn't pay me to say that, but like PCI has a great community, right? So you can join as a participating organization. You can go to the community meetings where you're going to be able to meet your peers. You're going to be able to meet the QSAs. You're going to be able to meet the vendors that can help you reduce the scope. And I think it's really important to be part of that community. And if I'm not wrong, I believe that the next community meeting in Europe is going to be in Dublin, which is where we're headquartered. And I think it was in Dublin before COVID. And this year, the community meetings in Toronto and Milan were fantastic. Great opportunity to learn. And again, my message is similar to yours, Gabriel, that we keep learning. There's always something to learn, but I think the PCI community is a very helpful and helping community, if that makes sense.
And also, if I may, to also add something, and Jeremy, you may expand on it, but there's a major evolution of the standard with the customized approach, which is a new way given to the companies to define their controls and how to implement the right security for their environment. Saying so, that sounds great, but that's definitely something that you need to start now, 1 year minimum before your next assessment, because it's not something that you're going to be able to use when the auditor is going to start. So again, it's a long journey, it's a complicated journey. It's a pretty useful way to implement security. And I've seen a question about other currencies. PCI-DSS, when it comes to payment, can be expanded to just the payment card itself. It's a good way to implement and monitor security, whatever the data is.
Yeah, they're asking about digital currency. I suppose cryptocurrency and PCI-DSS. Jeremy, maybe you can answer.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, really, this is coming back to how you utilize the PCI data security it's a standard that can be utilized across anything really, not just payments. We don't have a specific standard on cryptocurrency. We've been watching it, and again, one of the things as a standards body, we are always watching what's happening, which technologies come into the fore, and where do we think we need to work best next. And we do that with the global card schemes. We do that, as Matthew said, with our global community. You know, many of the suggestions of areas where we've moved to have come from either of those areas. And certainly, you know, with the change of technology in payments, with payments changing, that is something that the future of the council will need to look at. You know, the council doesn't stand still. That's why our community is so important. That's why organizations joining us, participating organizations, is so critical, because you've seen here we've got the experts on the panel, and that expert doesn't, you know, we listen as well. You know, a lot of what these guys are saying we're listening to, so we're watching where payments are moving towards. You know, is there a movement away? Is card use dropping? Yes, it is. Do we need to look into other areas? We've got our ears open, we're listening, and I think going forward, the new directions, the new opportunities, it's something we'll watch very closely and monitor, and if necessary, with the help of the community, we'll move in and provide some guidance or standards in that space.
Thank you, Jeremy. Moving on to our third topic, solutions and approaches. Adam, information security is a critical component of any successful enterprise. How do payment and non-payment security overlap?
You know, it's really interesting looking at this one in the context of what we just talked about digital currency, about cryptocurrency, things like that. There's a lot of convergence going on, where some of the same techniques that have been used for years to successfully protect payment data are being taken and adopted outside of this field. And I think we're also seeing the reverse happen as well, where there's this development of a culture of idea sharing and conversations between different types of stakeholders that, you know, previously you might have asked the question, well, where would these ever overlap? And it's interesting, almost surprising in some cases, to see the degree to which they do overlap. I think we would all be probably well served by continuing to involve some of these other stakeholders and say, well, I know you're not necessarily fitting in the box today, but let's talk about how we can all share some of this information. But that it really is all about that convergence. That's something that we're seeing. That also ties into the adoption of cloud as well. You know, for many organizations, it's not a single question of saying, well, do I move my payment application and my processing out to the cloud or not? It's part of an overall bigger picture strategy, not just a tactical move of one single piece. And so when you're doing that, just out of necessity, it has to involve a bigger conversation within the enterprise.
Are there any ways that are considered better for a company to adopt version 4? Daniel?
So, I mean, this is one of the areas where it's probably requirements that may get overlooked or not seen as ones that are as challenging within DSS version 4. Each requirement starts by saying, who's responsible for this requirement? So the idea, and one of the goals that PCI has always had, is embedding the DSS, the culture, the security requirements within the organization. And so taking it back to say, right, okay, let's look at the 12 requirements. Who are the people within the organization that are responsible for these, or who are the service providers that are responsible for these, and creating that understanding of responsibility, accountability, the RACI of PCI within the organization. That's going to start the ball rolling, and is a great conversation. That part that we talked about of validating the scope, well, scope of compliance is locations, people, processes, technologies. So it's covering, you know, a large part of that area. Once you start to bring those people in and start the conversations, you become a lot more aware. The more aware you are, the better the implementation is within the organization. So I'd always say to start there. Don't necessarily try and jump in or just look at all the new future dated controls and the requirements that apply to those. Start off with who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted and informed, to understand how that works within the organization, because speaking to the right parties about requirements gets you the right response. The number of times as a QSA where I've talked to talked to somebody within an organization and I'm looking at a system that hasn't been patched for 9 months. Well, it's not been patched because the owner won't let me patch it. And then I go and talk to the owner and I say, why are you not patching your system? Well, I thought they were. You know, that miscommunication, that misunderstanding of what the expectation of control is, that's where quite often organizations fall down. So I think actually that's the best way for organizations to start. Within PCI, we've created this sort of terminology, responsibilities matrix we talked about with service providers. Having a responsibilities matrix internally for your stakeholders, the people involved, I think that builds on where PCI 3.2.1 started with a charter of responsibilities for PCI, to then really go and push that through and say, okay, we've got the charter, we set out the importance of PCI at the board level and set the expectation of, you know, the support and the encouragement for the program. Now we're going to drill down into who's responsible, accountable, consulted and informed, so that when controls fail, there's a process where you can escalate and you can document. You know, a big update in the DSS talks about where time-bound controls fail. It's not necessarily a straight failure in PCI. As long as the organization identifies the failure, they have a process to identify, they have a process to then remediate and monitor moving forwards. That's the expectation of PCI. So I think they're the things that I would build on to be compliant with version 4.
Gabby, your take on version 4?
Sorry, again?
Your take on version 4 on compliance?
Yeah, okay. I think Adam elaborated and explained very well. And actually, it's written in the standard itself. Scoping is the most important stage in order to start the assessment. Without scoping, you cannot jump into it. Because you have no idea what's even what's feasible and what's not, because sometimes some of the requirements might be not applicable in some stages. So and this is actually one of the main things that we usually struggling with new customers, because they have no idea what's the PCI stands for. And I like those customers that are saying, okay, I'm in the cloud, everything is settled, let's do it, in a week we complete the assessment. So, okay, hold on your horses and let's try to figure out what is your scope. And only after we figure out what's the scope, then we start the gap analysis actually. And from there we take it, and it takes time. From my experience, most of the time, the first year can take from 3 months to 6 months if it's a small business. And really, there are even customers that cannot meet the PCI requirements even after 3 years. That's what happens. But yes, it takes time, and it's time demand and resource demanding to be PCI compliant.
Sebastian, what are Verizon's recommendations?
I believe a lot of things have already been said, and Dan make a good introduction of what is important if we want to be compliant. Gabby also mentioned a very important thing. It can be a very, very long journey. We had customers that took more than 7 years to reach compliance. So it's a complicated thing. If you never try to deal with PCI-DSS, that's a tough job. And depending on the complexity of your environment, you need to be prepared of that, to that. And to make the bridge between Adam, who was mentioning to have a support from QSAs, from external parties to help you in doing this, to what Dan was saying in terms of identifying the roles, etc. You need to implement the right governance. You need to have the support from the top management of your organization. You need to have a strategy built in, and that's not just a strategy for PCI, that needs to be part of your security strategy, because when it comes to doing things on a regular basis, to implement compliance on a BAU, you need to have this attached to everything that needs to be done in terms of security in your environment. PCI is probably not the only standards you need to comply to. So there are plenty of things to be done at the level. And if we need this to be done, exactly as Dan was saying, so many times people think some things is done, but nobody has been given the direction to do it and be made responsible for it to happen. And that's really comes right from the top, and the strategy from the company. So again, the first thing I would say today, aside from that sound strategy, is act now. PCI 4.0 is even more complicated than to compliance to PCI 4.0 is more complicated than PCI 3.2.1 is. So the first recommendation is start now with 3.2.1. And if for any reason, as I said earlier, you think that the customized approach compared to the standard approach that 3.2.1 was using, if you think the customized approach is your solution, definitely get in touch with your QSA company that helps you with that and help you now, because that's not something that's going to take you just few weeks or months to achieve. That's a very, very long road.
Thank you. Jeremy, what else is new from the council?
So obviously the DSS4 is a major release, and we never just release the standard on its own. So we always provide a large amount of support in documentation to help organizations on this path. And I think coming back to one of the things Dan was saying about, the order of doing things, one of the good documents that we've updated and is available on our website is a document we call the prioritized approach. Do we expect organizations to get DSS and then start at requirement 1, line 1? No, there isn't. The order you do things is trying to reduce the risk, do some of the major items first. So within the prioritized approach, we've kind of looked at all the requirements and laid them out in, you may not be compliant at this stage, but if you've done all of these, which we think is a milestone 1, then you've significantly reduced your risk. You go to milestone 2 and it's really, really reduced. So getting that and understanding that, it's not just go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's getting that, or, doing that will help reduce your risk. We've also introduced something, or we're just about to launch something this year, which we are calling our global content library. So a lot of our recorded content on guidance and videos around PCI-DSS 4 and a lot of other things we're now making available to the community. We've got lots of guidance and support documents, and we're doing blogs. So going to the PCI website at PCIsecuritystandards.org, it's not just the standards. Stay and have a look around. We've updated the website to make it easier to get around. We've introduced a new app to help people get the information. So all around version 4, there is a lot of help and a lot of support. And again, you're not on your own. We have all of our QSAs have now, we've made training available, and majority of QSAs have now had version 4 training, which is a requirement. So they're there to help you as well. So it really is, you're not on your own. You have got a lot of help and support, and do reach out and use that help, because yes, it is a major change. you do need help. I think Gavin said earlier on, it's like, do that gap analysis now so you know what you've got to do, so you can get those changes in place. So you can go, as Matthew said, you can go to the board and try and take them through those five levels of pain to acceptance that, yes, these are things we have to do. And then working with your QSA will help you on that journey. Because a lot of organizations we all know finances are tight and you don't want to spend money on the wrong thing. So to get advice, to seek support means that, yes, in your particular sector or your particular area that your organization's working, you're getting the right level of support, you're putting in the right practices, so you will meet PCI-DSS. It is a difference between, say, an airline and a multi-lane retailer. There are differences. So again, your QSAs can help really get you the best use of your money, really ensure you're meeting security. And that, again, is the support that the council is providing.
Can I add, please, something? The PCI, the standard is really alive, and actually the council has already announced that 4.1 is going to publish. And I want to tackle, Jeremy, about the recent, from last week, that they decided to cancel the in place with the remediation. So what happened? Because many customers were happy with it, actually.
It was interesting.
Yes.
I'm definitely happy to explain. So essentially, when we were developing this, we came up with the concept of in place with remediation. So essentially, because as you've heard from the guys, when they're doing an assessment, that assessment isn't over in one day, it can be many months. At the start of that assessment, they may see that something wasn't quite right and actually needed fixing, and the merchants go, oh yes, we can fix that quite quickly. And so they would put the correction in place, the QSA would assess it and go, yes, that is now fixed, and we could actually report that through the in place with remediation. We could see what was happening, and it seemed a really good idea. And then the community went, yes, but we have to sign contracts that say we are constantly compliant with PCI-DSS. So if we had an in place with remediation, what you're saying is actually at some point we weren't compliant and therefore we've breached our contract. And we're like, no, that was never the intention. So we can't force people to sort of incriminate themselves. And so from the feedback we had from our community, from our board of advisors, from our GIA representatives, and Daniel and Sebastian are both on that, they actually said, look, we have to take this out. And so we took the decision, yes, we would remove it from the reporting rights so that we didn't get into legal problems by having that thing. So we wanted to be, we saw it as a good idea to monitor progress, to monitor how companies were doing. We never intended it to be a legal issue. It had the potential for that, so we've had to move it out. And doesn't mean to say you can't look at it and use it, but it's not now a requirement of the standard.
And I want to add that I plead guilty too on the fact that we actually asked to get away from that compliance with remediation. Nevertheless, in your communication, the PCI Council also mentioned that we are going to keep a document that would be part of the work papers that would be listing those things that were not fully compliant at the time we started the assessment. And I just wanted to raise my hand on this one, because that's definitely, I mean, our payment security report shows every year what are the challenges that the companies are facing in maintaining compliance. And we are the first one to know that it's never 100% perfect when we arrive. I believe 19% of all our companies that we are assessing are compliant the day that we first start the assessment. So obviously, this document is critical for the companies to understand and to monitor from year to year, to monitor the difficulties in maintaining compliance. But again, we are living in a business world, and therefore, if you have two service providers, one who's showing that they were compliant with remediation and the other one that says they were compliant at 100%, then obviously one is going to have business, not the others. So we need to be realistic on this.
Thank you, Sebastian, and thank you, everyone. Now I'd like to take the opportunity to open the floor to our audience. Anyone who might have a question, feel free to drop it in the Q&A box below or in the chat section. That works too. Any questions?
I read there is a question about a service provider that is level 1, and he has a service or a merchant, an entity that is a level 1 rogue, and he has a service provider, and whether the service provider can be level 2 or SAQD. I would forward the answer to Jeremy, because he's representing the council. But what do you say? I would say go to your acquirer and ask him.
Yeah, I can't actually comment on compliance related matters. That is one you have to take to your acquirer, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, talk to your acquirer or talk to the brands.
So I saw that question as well, and absolutely right, is that it's acquirer or brand for guidance. But the thing to remember with PCI-DSS compliance is it's about risk. And as an entity, whether you are a merchant or a bank or service provider, you are responsible for the service providers that you use, regardless of whether those service providers are, say, listed on the Visa service provider list or the MasterCard service provider list. You are still responsible for their compliance, and you are still the data owner for your cardholder data. So you're responsible for making sure your service providers are operating in a way that you are comfortable with. So there is an element there of the business understanding the risk that the service provider may hold, because ultimately, if that service provider is providing a service to you and they are not visible to an acquirer or a card scheme, it's going to come down to your contract, your risk acceptance of that service provider. And we all see, the risk that service providers pose, not just in the payments industry, across the security landscape. So it's, I wanted to jump in because I knew Jeremy wouldn't be able to answer. And from a compliance perspective, that's where I sit it, is there is no right or wrong answer, other than if they process over 300,000 transactions, they must be level 1 compliant as a service provider if they want to be listed, but it's not a straightforward question to answer.
Thank you, Daniel. We have another question on our chat. How are merchant branded credit and debit cards treated by PCI-DSS? Jeremy.
Then they are exactly what they say. They are credit and debit cards, and therefore fall under the scope of PCI-DSS, and you should have you should adopt and implement PCI-DSS, and you should ask the guys here to help you on that process.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. A special thank you to our speakers, Gabriel Patlas, Adam Kaysen, Matthew Gorge, Daniel Farr, Sebastian Mazas, and Jeremy King. We look forward to hosting many more discussions like these in the future. To stay up to date on upcoming webinars, follow Hub Security on LinkedIn. Thank you, everyone, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.